Welcome to My Business Matters, the Michigan Chamber podcast.
Hello, I'm Jim Holcomb, President and CEO of the Michigan Chamber. Today's podcast host, we're going to be taking a closer look at what was a chaotic 2024 legislative session and maybe look a little ahead to 2025 and see what's on deck. We're lucky to have a couple key policy and political observers join us today. Zach Gorchow, he's the president of Gongwer News Service, and he's one of our Capital's go-to resources, a very well-respected reporting name here in Lansing. And also Mike Alaimo, Director of Energy and Environmental Affairs at the Michigan Chamber. Gentlemen, thanks for joining today.
Good morning.
Well, Zach, I'm going to start with you. You're certainly like I said, a respected voice here, and you've observed a lot. This was one for the books, I think. I'm hopeful that you have caught up on your sleep. We had some all-nighters and a lot going on there. Can you just start off for our listeners, kind of explain maybe what lame duck is?
So after the November election is what's called the post-election lame duck session. The idea is you've got some members of the legislature who are not returning and are considered lame ducks in the sense they're not going to be back. They've sort of lost their power. But in a way, it's kind of an odd term because these are the folks you kind of count on to think like, well, they've got nothing to lose. And the idea also is for the folks, the legislators who are coming back, they've got a full 2 years until the next election. And so because the attention of the American voter, the memory of the American voter generally is about that of a gnat, that whatever tough votes they cast now are going to be long forgotten.
Yeah, especially I think after a contentious election season, which we just came through, the public isn't paying attention. They don't want to think about politics.
Correct.
And so maybe there's a little bit less there. Mike, what did you think about this? I mean, you're a longtime policy staffer. You've been in the process, outside the process. You're a lobbyist. How did you see this unfolding here over the last couple weeks?
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting. Been through a number of lame duck cycles here, going back to, coming on staff as 2010. And this by far was the most challenging one. I think we saw a significant amount of dysfunction in the Senate and particularly in the House. As Zach said, lame duck is really a poor moniker for what this season is as an advocate and stakeholder because it is also termed silly season, when we see a lot of ideas, good or bad, being kind of oftentimes rushed through the process. We did see a lot of rushing, but then at the end of the day, things did kind of fall through. And so while the Senate was able to move some things in the late hours, the House was really unable to do so and get their ducks in a row.
Yeah. Zach, how do you approach that from a reporting standpoint? There are a lot of bills coming through committees. There were no hearings. There was no testimony. They were discharged to the floor in bunches. How do you kind of determine what you're going to cover, and then how do you even get into the details to make sure your readers are kept up to speed?
I mean, there's no good way to do this. Let me preface it by saying that, because typically, if the process runs as it should, which is, first committee hearing or hearings, we're covering those pretty in depth. We're probably doing like a 500-word story. People are testifying for and against a bill. We're getting into the details, and the bill moves through the process, maybe through committees in both chambers and passes. By then, we've really covered it in a fair amount of detail, and anybody who's got any view on the bill is going to have had their say in all likelihood. That's not what happens when the Senate blasts almost 100 bills that have not had a hearing or anything like that and have passed the House out in one night. So what do? Essentially, it's kind of funny. We listen for they announce the bills that are going to be taken up Sam Singh, the majority floor leader, will list off, I think he listed off 70 bills they were going to discharge from committees, meaning bypass the committee process, just pull the bill straight to the floor. I was writing each one of those down because they don't tell you what the meat of those bills is. And then over a many-hour period, I looked up what each bill was, and then myself and the Senate reporter who was on the Senate floor covering the moment by moment sort of grouped them and said, okay, what's newsworthy, what's not, what has more applicability than others, group those out, decide, okay, what's so significant that it should be its own headline and merits, at least 200 to 300 words of explanation, what is simple enough that it could be a few sentences. So just a quick example of that. One of the bills the Senate passed alters the percentages that public employers and public employees pay toward their health insurance premiums. That, is a huge bill, big deal. We're like, that's a headline item. Let's give that some space. And it's also complex enough that it needs the space. Example of something that is important but we kept short would have been the Detroit, the two museums in Detroit, the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History and the Detroit Historical Museum. Bill was passed to allow Wayne County to raise a property tax to support those two museums. It's very important. I don't want to minimize it, but it also can be explained in about 2 to 3 sentences. And under the circumstances, that's what we got to do. It's kind of a triage situation. So that's how we do it. It's not how we would want to do it in a normal circumstance. Let me be real clear about that. But that you got to make decisions. We're up until 2 a.m., 4 a.m., 5 a.m., 7 a.m. I mean, it was an incredible couple of weeks.
Yeah, no, I thought you guys did a great job. We rely on your reporting and your team to help us even ferret out issues and to try to delve into them a little bit. So we really appreciate the work you and your staff do. You're a longtime observer here. Is what happened, was it a breakdown of the process, or was it how the process is supposed to work? That the rules are there, you can discharge things. I get a little frustrated just as a citizen when I look at it and you're having all these bills come out, and a lot of them could have far-reaching impacts, and to not have a committee process to really unravel them and to have people debate on both sides of it, really just trying to improve it. I'm wondering how you saw it.
I think it's fair to say this is not how the process should work. Lame duck has always been a place where a lot of activity can happen, especially when one party is losing full control of the government. So I think about there's 3 that immediately come to mind. 2002, the Engler era was ending. Jennifer Granholm was about to become governor. 2012, the Republicans didn't lose the House, but their size of their majority shrunk, and I think they realized this was a chance to push a lot of things through with less difficulty. And then 2018, the Snyder-led trifecta was ending, and there was an avalanche of, I think, almost 400 bills went to the governor's desk. So this does happen. It's not terribly surprising, but what struck me as a little different about this one was there seemed to be a design for the whole year where there was going to be very little legislative activity, particularly in the House. And it was pretty much everyone with an interest around town was told, just wait until lame duck. We're going to do all this in lame duck. And I think that's part of the reason for this breakdown that occurred is the system is just not meant to handle in 3 weeks, a full year's worth of standard business. A lot of this stuff could have been done earlier in the year, and it wouldn't have put as much strain on the system. Now, like I said, lame duck, you go for some controversial issues there because you got distance until the election. But I think that too much strain was put on the system here, and that's a big piece of why it broke down.
Yeah, and I think, like you said, it was a planned strain on the system, which I think is unfortunate because what we've done is taken important issues. We haven't solved them. We haven't really debated them. We just pushed them off, and it was all politics over policy. And I think that's what frustrates the voters the most is, people could say, oh, we were there doing our job. No, you weren't. If you were there doing your job, you would have been there in June, July, August, September. You weren't doing your job because you were worried about an election, which is a rational thought, but it's not good for the system.
Yeah, I just don't I mean, we could have a whole hour podcast on this, so I'll try. I won't go too on and on. But the Democrats, especially in the House, I think really missed an opportunity that they made a choice. I know they did not have their full majority the first 4 months of the year, but that's on the floor. They still had their committee majorities, and I don't understand why they didn't use that time to queue up a whole lot of legislation, small and large, non-controversial, controversial. I know they were trying to protect their members during the election, and no one's saying they should go and cast votes that are the equivalent of forcing their members to walk the plank. But there was a lot they could have voted on that I think would have been fine. They could have voted on things I think would have helped their members, and they didn't even do that. So the regrets are exploding and are already very many among a lot of House Democrats about how this year was handled.
Yeah, which I find interesting. A lot of it's playing out on Twitter. You reference kind of missed opportunities. Mike, from the perspective of the business community or your observation, there were a lot of big-ticket items out there that just never really got across the finish line. What do you think are some of the best things or some of the biggest issues that didn't get the attention or the action that was needed?
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, I think Zach said it very well on the dysfunction side. I would say the other word that should be used to characterize this is just confusion about, what the mandate was of lawmakers to act on the best interest of voters and actually work bills. And so we saw this, wave of issues in front of House and Senate leadership. And it caused so much chaos and kind of white noise that ultimately nothing got done. And some of those really big issues that were left off the table were earned sick time and minimum wage and road funding. All three of these issues had a cacophony of voices pushing for needed changes, needed new revenues for our roads. In going into 2025, these were issues of urgency that I think many stakeholders, including the Michigan Chamber, were saying very clearly, you need to deal with this now, and this is something that is going to have really negative impacts if we wait even another year to fix. And again, because we had so many lawmakers out there pushing, their own priorities, things got really confused. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. As Zach kind of pointed out, this is kind of, one of those pieces of the process. Lame duck kind of is what it is. But what we saw was a lot of lawmakers not work their bills, not understand how to get things ready for prime time and action in any one chamber. And those were the very lawmakers that then kind of went public and kind of wanted to trash leadership or call people out for not getting their issue done. Well, if you haven't worked an issue properly, then what is leadership supposed to do? But unfortunately, that all meant that we saw some really key issues not cross the finish line before the end of the year.
What do you think that means for 2025? Are those issues still there for the new Republican majority and Speaker Hall to tee up? Is this an opportunity for them to come out of the gate and say, look, we can govern, we're going to pass these bills, and we'll work with Senate Majority Leader Winnie Brinks and the governor to see what we can get done?
We certainly hope so. I think, again, these are issues that really have an immediate sense of urgency surrounding them. If we don't move on paid sick time, going into the new year, employers are going to be forced to comply with this really, really high, standard and floor of how they provide these benefits to their employees. It affects every single employer, nonprofits, all sorts of businesses, large and small. Really, really impactful and costly for business to comply. Same thing with minimum wage. We're going to see that minimum wage ratchet up. The tipped minimum wage is going to ratchet up to 100% of minimum wage by 2030. These are issues that start to impact businesses immediately going into the new year. Road funding, too. I mean, we hear from voters every single cycle. It is at the top of their priority issues and concerns for lawmakers going into a new cycle. Didn't see the governor make the push that she promised to on a real deal. We didn't see leadership come together to figure out what their caucus members could vote on and get together. And so, for the chamber, this is going to be paramount going into the new year to force us to be at the top of the 2025 agenda.
Mm-hmm. Zach, we talk about policy and politics and their intersection. I'm, struck that one of the biggest drivers is usually personalities. I'm wondering, as we come through this lame duck and we head into 2025, how does the governor look after this? How does Speaker Tate look at this? Incoming Speaker Hall, did anybody come out looking better or really make a good impression on their leadership style?
I mean, I guess probably the nicest thing I could say is, January 8th, when the legislature reconvenes, is a chance for a fresh start.
Yes.
I don't think the last month is anything that anyone's ever going to write about, that this was the best and brightest period of Lansing. And that I think goes for everybody. Everybody did what they felt they had to do, and I think most people would say it really didn't work out, from advancing a lot of, much in the way of policy that they had wanted to do. I do think, the governor's position is going to be really interesting. She really did not engage in the legislative process for most of the year, which was a huge change from 2023, and really her MO in her tenure before. A lot of her focus was national, and she never outlined really much of an agenda for the year. Again, a huge contrast. I mean, she did essentially 2 State of the State speeches in 2023, and signed a heck of a lot of significant stuff into law. Just a complete 180 in 2024. So I think, it's going to be interesting to see how does the governor approach this last stretch of her tenure. Is it going to be, I'm diving headlong back into the legislative process, or am I starting to think more about national kinds of things? So that's one thing to really look at. And then I think, for incoming Speaker Hall, what's his approach going to be? We've seen he can be sort of the negotiator, deal kind of person when he was chair of the Tax Policy Committee in the 21-22 term, worked with the administration on a number of things, was quoted in their press releases on some bills the governor signed. But we've also seen he can be a bomb thrower, too. He led the House Oversight Committee and did a heck of a lot of investigating into the governor's administration, I believe, in his first term. I think he's talked about ramping up the oversight process here as he becomes Speaker again. But he also seems to be interested in moving some things, so I think he's going to have to turn the page from the walkout, which, tactically worked in the sense that it brought the Democratic trifecta to its knees. But you're going to be Speaker now. I assume he's not going to be walking his members out of the chamber. So he's got an agenda he's going to need to move now. And for Senator Brinks, I thought what was really interesting as we look to 2025 was these both Senator Brinks and Representative Hall exchanged these prepared statements as things were falling apart in the House that signaled an interest in negotiating with each other. We saw them talking on the Senate floor at one point, and I think it's going to be really interesting to see how they work together. I get the feeling, Senator Brinks took a much different approach to how she worked with the Senate Minority Leader, Eric Nesbitt. It wasn't, obviously all roses and champagne or anything like that, but, I think there was a working relationship there. They were able to work together on some things and make sure things didn't go off the rails, and I think there's a respect there. That was not the case between outgoing Speaker Tate and soon-to-be Speaker Hall. There was legitimate acrimony there. Yep. And I think that's going to be maybe the most important relationship in Lansing to watch is the Brinks-Hall thing and how that goes.
No, I think you're exactly right. I think the voters are much more paying attention to the personalities and who can get something done more than delving into the weeds sometimes on some of the issues. They trust that they're electing people to Lansing to come represent their best interest and do their best work, and they just want to know that people are being not only competent but collegial and trying to work together, that it's fine to disagree, but you don't have to constantly attack somebody else.
Yeah, I think this was, the way things went in the House the last 2 years was rough, and we've seen bad relationships between speakers and minority leaders. Certainly over the years, this was definitely one of them, and it just didn't work out. Matt Hall told one of our reporters, I think on Friday, the days have all sort of blurred together, but that he never could get Tate to trust him.
Yeah.
And I'm sure Tate would probably say, well, there's good reasons for that. But maybe years from now, former Speaker Tate will look back and say, boy, if only, I didn't like Matt Hall, but if only I had tried to work with him on a couple of things, we might have had, things might have been different. I don't know.
Yeah, he's going to be one of the personalities that I'm going to miss in town. He'll still be a state representative, but I enjoy Speaker Tate as a person. I think he's a good man with a good heart and trying to do his best. It's going to be interesting to see what this does to any future ambitions, whether it's running for mayor or something else, because these scenarios that played out certainly have an impact on how people view him. Mike, I'm kind of curious on your standpoint. You're a former staffer. One of the things that incoming Speaker Hall has done is that he's going to equalize staff. He's equalizing budgets. How important is a stable staff to the process?
Yeah, no, I mean, staff is huge, right? It's the old sports analogy of having a deep team. You want to have those ranks of thought leaders and people with historic policy perspective that are able to help guide lawmakers as they drive an agenda forward. So I think that future Speaker Hall is setting a proper tone going into that 2025 year. Zach, I think, said it really well that, Matt Hall is shown the ability to be a really good deal maker when the right circumstances present themselves. And we're certainly hopeful that he will work with the governor and work with Senate Majority Leader Brinks on some key issues. We also know that he has that ability to dive deep on, some of the oversight and investigative work that he feels is important to kind of bring to light and talk about. And so I think we should expect some of that too. At the end of the day, I think, what we generally just want is for elected leaders to understand that voters want, the legislature to be working for them. They want a results-driven agenda at the end of the day. There are important things that need to come to light. There's always a time and place for key messaging and things of that nature. But at the end of the day, we want, good collaborative work so that folks can come together on issues in a bipartisan way. And that's what we're hopeful for, and I think the Chamber has always tried to be a neutral, nonpartisan broker in that process to say, look, we just want good policy at the end of the day. And so that's what we're hoping for. That's what I want for Christmas this year, Jim.
Well, I'm hopeful somebody can deliver it, because I think that's what 10 million plus people in Michigan want. They'd like to see a good process and people working for them, making sure the decisions they're making is going to move everyone in Michigan forward, and we know we're stronger together, and we just want to make sure that comes across. Zach, as we close out, just wondering, any final thoughts, something we didn't cover, something you think is important for our listeners to hear? And then if you have a kind of look in your crystal ball, what's 2025 looking like? Are we going to see collegiality and people working together at the get-go, or is there going to be a continuation of lame duck and just, hand-to-hand combat?
Well, I think what's really interesting is we're going to have instead of the first 6 weeks of the session being kind of the typical ease in and get the committee chairs named in the House and start to ramp up, and the governor presents her budget. This, deadline is looming on the, minimum wage and sick time laws in terms of when they take effect, which is at the end of February. And I think that's going to throw a real charge into the system right away. I have no information on this, but it would not surprise me at all if House Bills 4001 and 4002, the first two bills introduced in the House, have to do with those two issues. And if Matt Hall doesn't just move something right away and just sort of, maybe even bypass the committee process and just say, look, we know what needs to be done. Here's a first volley. We got to get things moving, or, maybe move the committee process to command attention on it. I'm not sure. But that really, moves up the energy level right away. And the Democrats have made it clear they feel this is the Republicans' problem to start to fix, that this was, this would have been dealt with 6-7 years ago had the Republicans not adopted the initiated acts and then amended them. And, years later, the Supreme Court said you can't do that. So I think they've sort of taken the view that, okay, Republicans, you're serve, and then, you're going to have to come to the table on something here because this isn't necessarily our first choice for action. So what is it that soon-to-be Speaker Hall is willing to trade to get that done? And I don't know yet, but it's going to be a compressed timetable, and we're not used to having a February 25th or whatever date it is deadline.
Yep. Mike, how about you? Optimistic about the start of 2025, and what would you like to see teed up right out of the gate?
Yeah, well, I'm optimistic until I'm told otherwise. So, yes, I feel optimistic about, this new election cycle. It is a fresh start and new opportunity for leadership to come together. I do think that minimum wage and earned sick time will be top of the agenda for, Republicans in the House, but I think, hopefully for both chambers. And I think road funding needs to be an important part of the discussion as well. We talked a lot with leadership about that issue. A plan never really came together, but there was a lot of work put into laying the groundwork for what a plan could look like. I think, the chamber is always going to be at the table for making sure that taxpayer dollars are used wisely, but, also where and when we need new revenue to take a hard look at that. And we know that, our infrastructure is still crumbling, and this is a problem that needs to be solved. So those are the top three issues. I think we had carbon capture legislation get through the Senate and then ultimately die. So I think for my purposes, that's going to be an issue that we're trying to bring in front of the legislature early in the year, and we'll see what happens. But I think Zach's right. I think from what we're hearing, they're going to really push up this early year time frame and start getting to work on key issues and try to get some stuff done before the budget kind of takes over the conversation in spring of 2025. So, that's what we're kind of anticipating, and we're going to be prepared to be thoughtful stakeholders in that process.
Yeah. Well, it's certainly clear there's not a shortage of issues that we're all going to be dealing with. But as for today, unfortunately, we're out of time. I feel like we could keep going with this conversation for at least an hour here. But a very special thanks to Zach and Mike sharing your insights and your vantage points today. And thanks to all of you for listening. Make sure to tune into our next episode. Subscribe or like our podcast for easy notification. And as we head towards an active 2025, please make sure you engage, make your voice heard. We're all in this together, and it's going to take all of us working together to move Michigan forward.